Okay, before diving into the material, I want to say just a couple words at the outset about the design of the course and how the contents of this course can be made applicable to whatever to whatever context in which you are teaching your students Greek history and Greek literature. So the material in this course is based on teaching that I've done over a number of years, primarily to high school freshmen. So the contents are geared towards the capacities, interests, inclinations, and personalities of students who are ninth graders. And the workload, the reading level, the writing assignments are geared towards students at that stage of their academic career. However, with a number of adjustments, the material in this course can be made appropriate for students at the middle school level, all the way up through the upper levels of high school, all the way up through to senior year of high school. The course is designed for ninth graders because that's the most common time when classical educators are working with the Greeks, right? A very common format for classical curricula is a kind of cycle through the entirety of Western civilization, beginning with the Greeks. And so usually that means freshman year, students will begin that cycle and study the ancient world, the Greeks and the Romans. And so that's a common time when classical educators are working with this material. So the course is designed for that level, or is based on the capacities of students at that level. However, as I said, with necessary adjustments, it can easily be made appropriate for younger and older students. Generally speaking, for younger students, for students in the middle school, you're going to want to cut down on the reading, cut down on the pace of the reading. Rather than reading some of the text, the larger text in their entirety, you're going to want to cull excerpts that you can work with the students, work with them in class on. I think some of the historical texts that we'll take a look at are ones that you're going to want to lead them through very carefully, right? So probably can't get to as much of the reading with the younger students. The writing assignments that you're going to be doing with students at that level are going to be a bit more simplified. They're going to be more in the mode of narrative and descriptive type writing assignments. I'm thinking here of the Pro Gymnasmata, that series of exercises that I know a lot of classical educators use and begin to employ at the middle school level. And the early stages of the Pro Gymnasmata are focused on primarily on narrative and descriptive writing. So I think those are the kinds of writing assignments that you're going to be doing primarily with students, and then kind of the beginnings of argumentative writing, mostly limited to kind of paragraph type assignments. The larger scale essays, the larger scale argumentative essays, I think are more appropriate later on at the high school level. I think you're going to, with younger students, you're going to cull out most of the philosophical works that are covered in this course, that are mentioned in this course. I think maybe you would do a passage or two from Plato at most, of the passages I'm going to talk about. But for the most part, I would go very light on the philosophical texts with middle school students. Contrary, on the other hand, I would go very heavy with the art history that I'll be covering in this course. Right, I think for younger students, visuals are a great way for them to make their way into this material. Whereas some of the more complicated texts are going to be beyond their capacities at that stage. For upper school students, right, if you're adjusting the material for older high school students, right, you're obviously you can increase the pace of the reading. I think writing assignments now are going to be kind of full-length argumentative type essays, right? That students should be expected to write by junior and senior year, right? And again, reflect the continuum of the Pro Gymnasmata, which at the upper levels does prescribe that kind of full-length argumentative writing. I think with those students, you can go deeper into the philosophical text. So again, when we get to the philosophy in this course, you'll see it's designed to be a kind of intro to philosophy, an intro to some of the topics, the methods of philosophical disputation. I think when you get to, so it's relatively light on the philosophical reading. I think when you get to the upper levels, I think you can you can assign full length philosophical texts. I think you can take a look at a full dialogue of Plato. I think you can take a look at, let's say, the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle in its entirety, or at least a very sizable portion of it. So again, if you make those adjustments one way or the other, depending on the level of student that you're working with, you'll find that the material in this course will be suitable for students all the way from middle school up to high school. Additionally, this course is designed, the material in this course is designed to be taught in a humanities class, which is a kind of combined English, history course. It takes a place in the classical curriculum of the history and English classes that students would be taking elsewhere. In this course I've designed, it also incorporates art history, philosophy, and writing instruction, right, all together. And so in a humanities class, you can combine all those elements in a variety of ways, and they reinforce each other very fruitfully, right? And so the literature will highlight themes that emerge from the study of history. Art will be seen to express certain ideas that have been found expressed in the literature, and so on, right? So in that context, the combination of these different disciplines works exceedingly well and very fruitfully for students. Again, I know a lot of classical educators teach in that format, and so I think you'll find that the material in this course will be very suitable for you in that context. However, if you're not teaching in that context, again, with necessary adjustments, you'll find that the material in this course will work for you. So if you're just teaching an English class, right? If you're in a school that has a curriculum that prescribes an English class separate from the history class, you can still incorporate a number of the elements outside of the literature into your class. So obviously the writing instruction is going to be appropriate for you in English class, and is going to serve your purposes in English class. But some of the historical background, right, that will shed light on some of the text can be covered in kind of mini lessons in the context of an English class. I was an English teacher for a number of years, and I did that sort of thing routinely. All right, you can also bring in art, a number of the works of art that we're going to discuss, again, to highlight and express some of the themes that emerge in the study of the literature, and some of the philosophical texts, at least some of the excerpts from the philosophical texts I'll be talking about would be perfectly suitable to cover in an English class. If you're in a history class, conversely, the art history works very well. It would be very easy to incorporate into a history class. Similarly, some of the passages from philosophy, right, some of the pre-Socratic passages can be incorporated to convey to students the kind of intellectual awakening that's so central to the importance of the Greeks. All right, so if you're giving a history of the Greeks, it should be a cultural history. It should be a history of the legacy, the cultural legacy that the Greeks have left to us. And so working the art and the philosophy into a history class would be entirely appropriate. And so you'll see that the contents of this course will be appropriate for you in that regard as well. There is also the opportunity to coordinate among teachers, right? So as you'll see in this course, and you can take a look at the course outline to see how it's designed, as you progress through the material, you're covering certain literature at certain times that is meant to correspond to the material in the history and the art history, and all of them kind of move together in ways throughout this course that, as I said, are kind of mutually reinforcing and mutually explanatory. So with some coordination among history teachers and history departments and English departments, you can set up the curriculum so that the history teachers are covering certain material at a time when the English teachers are covering certain material, and maintain that coherence and that correspondence, right? So with enough coordination among department members and specific teachers, you can incorporate the material in separate classrooms in the way it is incorporated here in a single course. For homeschoolers who are working with this material and who are looking to satisfy the requirements in English and in history, you'll see that the material in this course will cover all that, right? Will satisfy all of those requirements. Again, the format in which this material was primarily taught was in a humanities class, which met for an hour and a half, 5 days a week. All right, so what is here is based on that kind of time devoted to the material throughout the week. It is the material in the course is designed for a semester's worth of work. Right, it formed part of an ancient world humanities class. So the first semester was the Greeks, the second semester was the Romans. So what is being covered in this class is a semester's worth of material that was approached in hour-and-a-half classes 5 days a week. So again, you can then adjust this material here depending on your time allotment and your time requirements, right? So if you have half a year to devote to this material, and you have roughly an hour and a half every day to devote to this material, then you'll find that the course is designed in a way that will allow you to simply follow along with the design, the course plan over the course of a semester. If you have a longer period of time or a shorter period of time, obviously you have to truncate some of the material, right? If you don't have as much time in class, or if you have more time in class, you can adjust the material accordingly. But so you understand that the contents of the class are designed to meet those time requirements. And then again, depending on what your time requirements are, you can adjust either by truncating some of the material or augmenting it and going in depth, a little bit more depth on some of the topics. Finally, I'm going to talk about some of the writing that I do with students as part of the assessing for the class. I'll be talking about the kinds of assignments that I think are fruitful for students to really engage thoughtfully and deeply with the material. If you want a deeper understanding of the kind of writing instruction I provide for students alongside the history and the literary instruction I provide, I would encourage you to take a look at the course on writing instruction that is offered through the Parnassus Academy, entitled Say More. All right, and in that course I give a very extensive explanation of the kind of writing instruction I think works well in a classical setting, the kind of writing instruction I think brings alive material like the Greeks, and really benefits the students in a number of ways. So I'll be kind of alluding to some of the material in that course throughout this course, but if you really want a kind of in-depth account of the kind of writing instruction that I think complements a classical humanities coursework, I would encourage you to take a look at Say More. So with all that said, let's begin. Okay, so any class on the Greeks is obviously going to begin with a reminder to students, and hopefully by the time they've gotten to high school, it's a reminder again for younger students. You're going to be informing them of this for the first time, but you want to start off by pointing out where Greece is, right? What's the place in the world that we're going to be talking about and focusing on over the next couple months, right? And so a good way to start is simply with a map, calling their attention to the area that we're going to be discussing here. And the relevant, and it's important to point out that the Greek world includes not only the mainland here, right, but also the islands, the Cyclades, scattered throughout the Aegean, all the way over to the coast of what is present-day Turkey, but which was at the time the region of Ionia, right, and which would play a very important role in Greek history and culture, and which we'll be talking about regularly, right? The important thing to say, I think, at the outset, and the important thing to point out to students at the outset is the fact that Greece is located more or less in the middle of the Mediterranean basin, right? And so from its earliest inception, from its earliest stages, it has regular contact with the other cultures of the Mediterranean basin through trade, through travel, through military conflict at times. The Greeks are coming into contact with the other peoples of this part of the world, right, through colonization as well, right? So the Phoenicians, the Egyptians, right? These are all peoples that the Greeks are interacting with on a fairly regular basis, right? And being influenced by in ways that, again, will come up in the course of the coursework, right? So Greek culture, Greek civilization doesn't simply pop out of nowhere, right? It's not the beginning of the story in a sense, right? You can go back and tell the story of the rise of civilization, going back to the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians, and the Greeks themselves understood the debt that they owed to these other peoples, particularly the Egyptians, right, with which they were fascinated, right? You can see that in Herodotus, right? So in one sense, right, in starting the story of Western civilization with the Greeks, right, you're picking up the story kind of in the middle, okay? Nonetheless, I think the important point to make here is that it's not an arbitrary starting point, right? We don't start with the Greeks just because. The Greeks really do send down to us as their legacy certain habits of mind, certain habits of thought, certain insights into the human condition, certain ways of certain modes of social organization, certain modes of artistic creation that really do form the starting point for Western culture, right? And this is really, to step back for a second, this is really the goal of humanities instruction, right? Is to teach our students where their world comes from, to help them understand that they're not the first ones to experience the world, to encounter the world, to encounter the patterns of human experience, right? That others have gone before them and have left to us a treasury of insight and wisdom that we can make our own, that the students can make their own, to guide them and to help them develop in ways that are fruitful, right? So, their whole progress through the tradition of Western civilization, their whole progress through humanities instruction is in part an awakening or attempt to awaken in our students an understanding of the contours and the dimensions of human experience, kind of, again, the patterns, the essential patterns that make for human life, right? And so there's a kind of anthropological story to be told in the course of their humanities work, right? There is a kind of theological story to be told, right, about man and his ultimate destiny, right, to be told in the course of their humanities instruction. But there's also a kind of historical story to be told, right? The world that they inhabit is a world that's been shaped by certain beliefs, certain habits of mind and spirit, and that story really does begin in Greece, right? And so that's why we start there, and that's why we begin our study of Western civilization with these particular peoples known as the Greeks. So Greek civilization itself has a starting point in a period that far predates the historical and classical period, which is certainly the focus, I think, of any humanities course on the Greeks. Certainly is the focus of this course. And depending on your time constraints, you can go into this material with greater or lesser depth, right? I think the early stages of Greek civilization can be taught in a fairly truncated way if you're at a loss for time. But if you have the time to spend a few days on it, about a week on it, I think it is worth the students' time to understand a little bit about the story of the origins of Greek civilization. So the earliest traces of civilization in the Greek world are to be found on the island of Crete, and this is the so-called Minoan civilization, centered at the ancient city of Knossos, where the palace, the famous Palace of Knossos, remains as the most famous ruins from the Minoan civilization. You see the dates of the Minoan civilization there. It's a civilization that spans back quite a long time. It is a civilization that grows and flourishes around the same period as the Egyptians, with whom they traded and had interaction. It was a civilization that seems to have largely been peaceful, at least based on the artistic record that is left behind. There's not a lot of depictions of warriors or fighting or that sort of thing. It's primarily more pacific in the kinds of things that are represented there. But the Minoans were clearly traders. They were clearly seafaring peoples who had contacts with a number of the other peoples, including the peoples of the mainland of Greece, to whom they spread their culture eventually. And so there's remnants of a Minoan civilization in the south of the Peloponnese, clearly indicating contact between those peoples and the Minoans. As I said, it's the palace at Knossos, which is the best preserved and best known ruins from this civilization. You can show the students that some of the visuals of that location. There's a link to a video here which will show which contains some of those visuals. The most famous work of art from the Knossos Palace, and probably the best preserved, is this one here. It's the famous bull leaping mural, which seems to represent a kind of religious ritual or religious rite that the Minoans partook in. And what seems pretty clear about the Minoans is that the bull played an important role in their mythology or even their theology, right? There's a number of depictions of bulls in their artwork. As you see here, a kind of religious rite combined with a kind of athletic exercise, which is presumably was meant to display the agility and the courage of the athlete in question. So this is a great visual for the students to present, and the writing assignment I do with students, a simple writing assignment you can do with students at this stage. Again, we're very early on in their high school career. I'm spending a lot of time in the writing instruction at this stage, working on sentence writing and giving them guidance on how to write effective sentences. We're talking about verb usage. We're talking about adjective usage, and how to choose the right words under those parts of speech. And so, a simple exercise you can do here is a kind of descriptive assignment. Ask students to write a paragraph describing what they see here, and you can give them a list of verbs that they should use, or give them a list of adjectives to use. You can, if they have dictionaries at hand, you can give them a kind of list of exotic verbs that they have to use, and they have to look them up first and then employ them, or something along those lines, right? To really kind of habituate them to looking for just the right words, particularly verbs and adjectives. So that's a simple kind of writing assignment that students can do, and it's one that gets their eyes on the painting, gets them really looking at it and focused on it. And so the writing here, as I said, is a way of kind of promoting their engagement with the material, right? They're really kind of focused on the visual. They have to take a close look at it, notice the details, and then provide a description. So while at the same time you're obviously providing writing instruction to them, you're eliciting their concentration on the material at hand, which is very much what we want to do. Okay, the Minoan civilization ultimately begins to subside and lose its power and reach. There's some theories about that. The primary I think what is primarily accepted as the explanation for the decline of the Minoans has to do with the explosion of a volcano on a nearby island called Thera, where one of the outposts of Minoan civilization was located, and the explosion of this volcano more or less destroyed the settlement that was there, as well as presumably sent tidal waves against the shores of Crete, destroying a number of the settlements there, including Knossos. So it seems like the decline of Minoan civilization dates to the eruption of that volcano. So I think that's the kind of the most widely accepted theory on that. And that is incidentally thought by some, at least, to have been the origin of the legend of Atlantis. All right, the underwater city, because the city on Thera was basically sunk by that volcano. So with the decline of the Minoans, a new civilization eventually emerges on the Greek mainland, and this is the Mycenaean civilization. This is kind of early Greek, the early Greek civilization, right? And there's a number of continuities between the Mycenaeans and the kind of the Greeks of the historical and classical period, which we'll talk about. But you can see the shaded parts of the map there, where you can see the Mycenaeans eventually kind of spread to. And so that's a good portion of the Greek-speaking world from the historical and classical period. And the key thing to say, I think, to students about the Mycenaean period is that this is the period when the main cities of Greece begin to be settled, right, including Sparta and Athens. That during this period, the locations, the primary locations of the Greek population will begin to converge on those locations. All right. So a number of the key features of Mycenaean civilization, you can take a look at some of the visuals of the ruins of Mycenae in particular, and you can see the way they built their walls with this heavy stonework, and these are what were known as Cyclopean walls, right? Because the latter-day Greeks who saw these ruins thought that the stones were so large that only the giant Cyclops could move them into place. But the significance of those walls is they were obviously built as fortifications, and so the Mycenaeans were warriors, right? They were a warring people, and their expansion, including into places like Crete, right, formerly the stronghold of the Minoans, seems to have been, at least at times, a matter of conquest, right? So, as I said, the Minoans seem to have been a little bit more pacific. The Mycenaeans clearly were a warrior people, and the architectural ruins do reflect that. All right, the language, the written language, the script that the Mycenaeans employed has come to be known as Linear B, and this is the first decipherable script that comes down to us from the Greek world. All right, there was a Linear A that was in use by the Minoans, which is, I believe, entirely indecipherable. And then later on, a separate script known as Linear B was actually developed first among the Minoans and then spread to the mainland and then was employed by the Mycenaeans. And this is a script that's decipherable. So we have some remnants of artifacts that have this script on it. And so there's an ability to interpret or to understand Mycenaean civilization a little bit better. One of the things that we can interpret, and one of the things that we can tell as a result of those artifacts, is that the Mycenaeans did believe in something like, or did ascribe to something like the Greek pantheon, right? The primary gods of the Greek pantheon are attested to in some of the artifacts that come down to us from Mycenae. So the city of Mycenae was probably the most powerful and most influential of the city states that emerged during this period. It's why the civilization is called the Mycenaean civilization. You can show students the so-called citadel at Mycenae, which is one of the best preserved ruins from this period. A number of the most famous artifacts from Mycenae are to be found here, including this very famous what's called the Mask of Agamemnon. Eventually, Mycenaean civilization does fall apart. It comes apart during the so-called Bronze Age collapse, roughly 1100 BC. which saw the collapse of a number of other civilizations throughout the Mediterranean basin. And there's a number of theories about what was going on during that period. But it brings on what's known as the Greek Dark Age, right, which is a period about which we know very little, and from which very little survives to attest to what was happening to the people during that period. But then, Greek civilization begins to reemerge. And one of the very earliest flourishings or evidence of that reemergent civilization are the works of Homer, right? Who is writing or composing really somewhere roughly around 750 BC. And the important thing to articulate to the students, and I think really what makes the study of the Mycenaeans relevant and interesting to students is the fact that Homer is setting his story back in the world of Mycenae, right? Of the Mycenaeans, right? He's writing in 750 BC, and he's writing what's really kind of like the earliest text that comes down to us, right? If you exclude things like Gilgamesh, right, outside the Greek-speaking world, but at least in the Greek-speaking world, Homer's he's one of the earliest texts that comes down to us. And even he is looking back to an earlier time, right? He's looking back to an earlier age. And so all of the heroes of his works are going to hail from major civilizational centers of the Mycenaean period. Okay? Notably, Agamemnon, right, the leader of the expedition to Troy, is the king of Mycenae, right, king of the most powerful of the Greek city-states. Right? So that's why, it's part of the reason why he's tasked with leading the expedition to Troy. But all the other the heroes as well hail from locations that were settled at the time of the Mycenaean civilization. So Homer, in writing the Iliad and the Odyssey, is writing about a world long past, right? And it's worth pointing out to students that this is a kind of basic intellectual and spiritual instinct that people have, right? Is to look to the past for some standard of conduct, some standard of spirit, right? That will provide us with an understanding of who we are and who we should be, right? We're always, as human beings, we're always looking to the past for wisdom and for guidance. And Homer was doing that, and through his text was encouraging his fellow Greeks to do that. And of course, we, in going back then and studying the Greeks, are doing the same thing, right? So there's this kind of continuity, this kind of spiritual continuity where every generation kind of looks back to its predecessors for inspiration and guidance. And that's true from the very beginning. So that then would be the place to start with Greek history, right? And that would be sort of the first unit to cover with the students in regard to the historical content. Alongside of that material, right, I will be teaching the Odyssey, right? So as I begin with Greek history, with the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, I will begin the opening section of the Odyssey. And just a word on why I select the Odyssey to read with students. I know a number of curricula prescribe the Iliad as the work to read with students. It clearly is the great text of the ancient Greek world. It's one of the great texts in Western history, arguably the greatest story that we have. And I'm purely literary grounds, almost certainly a greater literary work than the Odyssey. Nonetheless, I think the Iliad, and let me say, I think it's perfectly appropriate to teach the Iliad to freshmen. And if you are teaching and even younger, and students even younger, if you are teaching it to students at this stage, I think you're probably going to want to skip around a bit, right? There, Homer nods, as Pope reminds us, and there's significant portions of the Iliad where the battles are being described, and it can be a bit much, and it can be a bit tedious. So I think you're going to want to kind of find the right passages to work with your students. I think obviously the opening section, the embassy to Achilles, the departure of Hector. And his meeting with his wife and with his son Astyanax, right? The defeat of Patroclus, the fight over Patroclus's armor, and then the battle between Achilles and Hector. All those are important and moving passages and interesting passages to students. And I think in the course of teaching it, right, there's a number of themes that I think are accessible to students at that level, right? The warrior code, right? The warrior virtues, the pursuit of glory, right? And the sense that pervades the whole work, that that a life devoid of heroic effort and heroic enterprise is in some ways a life not worth living, right? That we are all called to make something extraordinary of our lives, right? And all those men are fighting there to make their lives memorable, right? To do something memorable on the battlefield, right? And so those would be the kinds of themes I would want to emphasize with younger students. I think those are themes that are accessible and I think important for students at that level. Nonetheless, I do think the Iliad works at a number of other levels as well. It's really a kind of tragic story, has a number of really kind of profound insights into the tragic state and the tragic condition of human life. And I do think for that reason, it's best reserved for older students. I think that it's juniors and seniors who are really going to be able to wrestle with the full depth of that text. And so when I've taught it in the past, it has been to seniors, and that's where I feel kind of comfortable getting into some of the more tragic dimensions of that text. So that's just a word on why I don't teach the Iliad. But the reason why I teach the Odyssey is because it is the perfect text to teach to students at this stage, particularly students who are just beginning high school, who are early on in their intellectual and moral development, because the story is all about a young man who lacks the virtue to undertake the duties that are incumbent upon him, and who over the course of the story grows into those virtues by having the right exemplar to model those virtues for him, right? So the Odyssey, of course, is a story of Odysseus, but in a lot of ways, it's I don't want to say it's more so the story of Telemachus, but it's at least for high school freshmen and for younger, I think it should be the story of Telemachus. He's really the figure that they can and should identify with, because, as I said, he's a young man who lacks the requisite growth and development, and who over the course of the story will undergo that growth and development, right? So in that sense, the story kind of teaches itself to high school freshmen, right? They have no problem understanding, and you don't have to go very far emphasizing to them what the relevance of the story is to their own lives, right? They will get it quite readily. So for that reason, I think the Odyssey just works perfectly for high school freshmen. As I said, I think it will work for middle school students if you pull out the proper excerpts, some of the passages that we're going to talk about. I think it will work just fine for them as well. All right. So over the next couple lessons in this course, I'll be talking about how to teach the Odyssey, some of the themes and passages to focus on. So I'm going to talk in this lesson about books 1 through 4. So books 1 through 4 form a kind of unit within the Odyssey. They're often referred to as the Telemachiad, right? Which title indicates the focus of those first 4 books, which is on Telemachus, the son of Odysseus, right? So the story starts off with Telemachus left alone in Ithaca, his house and his kingdom beset by a group of suitors who are trying to marry his mother, Penelope, and by marrying her, take over the throne of Ithaca, and of course taking that throne away from himself. Right? There's still question about whether Odysseus is alive or dead. He's been gone from Ithaca for 20 years. Telemachus has not known him during that whole time. Of course, Odysseus has been fighting in Troy for 10 years and traveling home for another 10 years. And Telemachus is left at home, beset by the suitors, and clearly is incapable of fending them off. Right? Clearly is incapable of fighting for his own right to the throne, and by extension, his family's right to the throne. Right? And so the first time he appears in the story, one of the first times he appears in the story, he calls an assembly, and he goes up in front of the assembly and breaks down in tears. Right? And it's a clear sign. I mean, Homer clearly wants you to understand that this is a young man who lacks the requisite virtue to be a leader. Right? He's too weak. He's too lacking in virtue at this stage of the story. Right? And then, as we'll see, the story then is very much about how he grows into a man of virtue, into a man who is fully capable of exercising the duties incumbent upon him. But it's important to recognize that when he is first presented to us, he is a man lacking in the necessary characteristics. Right? So how does he grow? How does he develop? Right? Well, it's through emulation. It's through looking at men who embody the kinds of virtues that he is meant to embody, that he fails to embody, but that he wants to embody. And the first of these figures, obviously the most important of these figures is Odysseus, but the first of these figures that's presented to him is not Odysseus. It's the figure of Orestes. Okay? And if you know the story of Orestes, he's the son of Agamemnon. Agamemnon is killed by his wife Clytemnestra, along with her consort Aegisthus, when he returns home from the fighting in Troy. And this leaves to Orestes a dilemma, because as the son of a man who's been murdered, he's tasked with taking revenge for that murder. But of course, in his case, the murderer is his mother. Right? So he's tasked with killing his mother to take revenge. And of course, that story is a story that's told in Aeschylus's Oresteia. And Orestes finally does go through with that murder. He kills his mother and takes revenge for her murder of his own father. And that sounds harsh, and it sounds strange to us, right? To celebrate a man who is willing to kill his own mother, right? But the significance of that story, I think, for Homer, is that Orestes represents a man who would stop at nothing to fulfill his duty to his father, right? And to fulfill his duty as a prince, right? Of a kingdom that's been overtaken by a wrongful ruler. Okay? So Orestes is presented in the story, in the opening of the Odyssey, as a kind of model, a model son, right? Who will not blanch at any difficulties, at any dilemmas, in order to fulfill his duties to father and kingdom. And so when the work opens up, you can see the passage here on your screen. This is from the very opening, right? Right after the invocation, there's a conversation between Athena and Zeus about Aegisthus, who is the consort of Clytemnestra, and who participated in that murder of Agamemnon. And they bring up Aegisthus, and of course he's a resemblance, or he resembles the suitors insofar as he sought a power that was not rightfully his. The suitors are doing the same thing, and of course, in the sense that Aegisthus is finally killed rightfully for trying to take that power. There's a kind of foreshadowing here of what's going to happen to the suitors for their unrightful desire for power in Ithaca. Right, but the significance here is really to introduce Orestes as the model son. Right? Because later on, when Athena is going to appear to Telemachus in the guise of mentor, right? And the name and the guise that she takes on is significant there. She's going to adjure Telemachus to be like Orestes. She's going to say that specifically. Be like Orestes. Be like that young man who also found himself powerless, who also found his kingdom beset by an unrightful ruler, right? Who also was without aid or assistance, right? But who summoned the necessary strength and determination to do what needed to be done, to carry out his duty, and to do right by his father and his kingdom. You do the same, right? So Orestes is clearly presented in these opening sections as a kind of model for Telemachus. But clearly the great model for Telemachus is his father Odysseus. And so the recommendation that Athena gives to Telemachus is to go in search of his father to see if he's still alive or not. Again, it's still an open question at this stage. So she tells him, she gives him instructions to set out on the sea, to go to the courts of Nestor and Menelaus, two of the great heroes with whom Odysseus fought at Troy, and see if either of them can provide him with information about his father's whereabouts or survival. So it's a journey that Telemachus goes on in search of his father physically, right? He's going to look for his father to see if he's still out there, if he can find him. But what happens in the course of that journey is that Telemachus doesn't find Odysseus himself. Menelaus will tell him that, I've gotten word, I've heard rumors that he's still alive out there, that he's still out there, right? So Telemachus will return with some confidence or some renewed encouragement that his father is still alive, though he doesn't find him physically, right? But what happens in the course of that journey is that he finds his father in a different kind of way. He does discover his father. He discovers the man that his father was and is. He discovers the kind of virtue that his father exemplified. He discovered the kind of capacity for leadership that his father demonstrated at Troy. And so what he discovers is the standard or the model that his father provides to him, his son. So when he goes to the court of Nestor at Pylos, Nestor tells Telemachus, upon learning that he's the son of Odysseus, he tells him that he and Odysseus always agreed in council, right? That when decisions had to be made among the Greek generals and when they gathered together in assembly, both he and Odysseus always shared the same opinion and always counseled the Greeks to do the same sort of thing. And of course, Nestor is the wisest of the Greeks, right? He's the kind of the proverbial or almost I want to say kind of cliched, although it wasn't cliche in Homer's time, right? It's become a cliche since of the old wise man, right? With the long beard who's seen many things and is always kind of complaining about young people these days. Nestor is always talking about how much greater the heroes were back when he was a young man. But who has a kind of wisdom born out of that experience, right? And so Nestor is recognized among all the Greeks as the best counselor, right? Is the one to go to for really prudential advice. And so when he says that he and Odysseus always agreed, that's his way of saying that Odysseus too was a man of great prudence, of great cunning. Right, that Odysseus was a wise man as well, right? And so Telemachus is hearing that and saying, okay, so that's what it takes to be a leader, right? You have to be the kind of man that that others look to in a moment of crisis for advice and for guidance, and you have to have the resources to counsel well, the intellectual resources to counsel well in those circumstances. That's what it takes to be a great leader. Telemachus hears that, and he takes it to heart. He then he travels to the court of Menelaus at Sparta, and again he hears from Menelaus a story about his father. So in the passage that's here, this is where Menelaus tells Telemachus that when the Greeks were gathered together the Greek warriors were gathered together in the belly of the Trojan horse, which stratagem, of course, was Odysseus' idea to begin with. Right? But when they're gathered together in that construction, a number of the other Greek warriors began to get anxious. Right? They're waiting to burst out. They're obviously nervous about the moment. They're kind of losing their cool or losing their head as they are waiting for the right moment to emerge out of the Trojan horse and sack the city. And it's at that moment that Odysseus exercises his composure, exercises his state of mind, his composed state of mind, and calms the others down and counsels patience and ensures that the stratagem comes off effectively by avoiding undue rashness. That's the kind of man he was. That in a moment of great tension and anxiety and danger, he kept his wits about him. And Telemachus hears that, and he understands that's the sort of man I'm supposed to be. So as I said, then by the end of his journey, by the end of book 4, Telemachus returns back to Ithaca, not having found his father physically, though having received encouraging news about his survival. But he returns in a much deeper sense with an understanding of who his father really is, of the standard of virtue that his father embodies, and which he himself is called upon to embody in his own life and in his own conduct. And so by the end of book 4, by the end of this opening section of the Odyssey, Telemachus has undergone the first stages in his moral development. And they begin with finding the right model of virtue, the right model of what it means to be a leader and to be a man of virtue, of what it means to be a person of virtue. And so the remainder of the Odyssey is going to be very much the story of how he continues to grow from that first stage of development, how he continues to grow into a man of virtue. And we'll continue that story in the next lesson.